David. This is a figure in the Bible that many people look up to. When they hear his name, they think, "Oh yeah, is that the boy who defeated Goliath? The shepherd boy who helped protect God's people when they needed faith in their God the most?" He alone trusted in God and wanted Israel to thrive. What many people do not know is why David is often called a man after God's own heart. In the church, we are taught that David was a favorite of God because he obeyed, and although his human side often failed, it always trusted God, and he knew in the end that God was on his side. His faith kept him strong and kept him in God's favor. Who is the God that David served, though? If David really did serve a loving God, then why are we shown that David was a ruthless warrior and often longed for the death of his enemies? Why was David chosen to be king after Saul, when Saul had fallen short and had asked for forgiveness, but God gave him no second chance? Why is David called a hero of faith, when in fact he was a tribal king who destroyed anyone who might get in his way? These are all things that are left out of the story of David. I was told that David loved and respected God, that he followed God's commands, and that is why he was to be king of the Israelites. Is this why David was chosen as king, though? Or was the God of the Bible really a war god who demanded lives of the innocent, and those who would not ruthlessly murder others were seen as less to him? Let's look at the life of David, and why he was a favorite of the Old Testament God. David was not the original king. The king before him was named Saul. This king did not always follow what God told him to do. There are two reasons why we are told Saul lost his kingdom to David. First, he had offered burnt sacrifices to God without Samuel, which to God was a big no-no. You could not offer anything to God unless you were the high priest. This was Samuel's job, and when Saul took it upon himself to honor God, Saul was told his kingdom would come to an end. Second, when God demands complete genocide, he means it. Samuel had told Saul that he was supposed to kill everyone, including livestock, infants, and women. Saul disobeys God by allowing the king and some animals to live. Saul had morals. He saw which people and animals were good, and he kept them alive. There was no issue in Saul's mind that killing everyone and everything was wrong. So he followed his own conscience, and in the end, it cost him everything. God then picks David to do his bidding. While I look at the Bible and see what kind of man Samuel was, and how he completely and utterly controlled Israel, my mind tends to lean into the idea that Samuel picked a young kid who could be manipulated and trained to do what he says, versus a grown man like Saul, who had his own mind and could not be molded into the king that Samuel thought their tribe should have. After this, we get into the famous story of how David stood up against the giant Goliath and killed him with a simple stone. This is the underdog story we all want. The story sets David up as not only a future king who will do great things, it shows his courage and the ability to trust God no matter what issues he may face. He was going to become a mighty warrior for the God he served, since we know Yahweh is very much a war god and a god of blood. David's first major act in front of the Israelites would show them that their future king was going to lead them into victory against any enemy that they might face. David became the captain of Saul's army. He went and fought anyone whom Saul told him to fight and kill. Over time, Saul became jealous of David. People would sing in the streets about this amazing man and how he had killed so many enemies. Saul said, "They say David has killed tens of thousands, and I have killed only thousands. Next thing you know, David will have my kingdom too." This is strange, since we already know God had told Saul through Samuel that he was going to lose his kingdom to someone else. because he had disobeyed and used his own mind to do what he wanted to do. I guess Saul never put two and two together until after David was being loved by the people and he was not. Saul went on a rampage. He was going to keep this kingdom, and the way he would do it was by killing David. Saul then went out and tried to kill David twice with a javelin. He missed both times, and this made him even more angry. Saul decided, since David was so loved by all the people, he could marry one of his daughters. David said he would do what was needed of him in order to marry her. In order to buy the daughter, Saul needed 100 Philistine foreskins. David agreed. Then he went out and went above and beyond what he was asked. He brought the king 200 foreskins. Then the king gave his daughter to David. War once again broke out with the Philistines, and David went out and killed as many as he could. Once again, Saul hated David and tried to kill him again the same way he had before, with his javelin. You would think the third time's a charm, but nope. David got away again. David's wife told him he needed to go somewhere to hide, because Saul was not going to stop until he was dead. So David snuck out to hide. To make this long story shorter, just know that this pattern of Saul trying to kill David goes on for a while. David does some more fighting, marries a few more women, and then Saul ends up dying in a battle. This opens the way for David to become king, as God had promised. This is where we get into what made David a better king in the eyes of the God of the Bible. The very first thing David does when he hears that Saul has been killed is kill the man who came to tell him that he had died. This messenger was someone who claimed that Saul had asked him to kill him because he was wounded and did not want to continue living. He had shown kindness and mercy to the king. In David's eyes, though, this was a weak and unhonorable thing to do. If you killed a king, even if he asks you to do it, then your blood spilled is all your fault. This is the man that God loves after his own heart. There is no surprise here. David was going to be a ruthless murderer and a servant of the God he alone served. There was no mercy or kindness in his heart, and there could not be if he was going to serve Yahweh. Then he would completely have to throw away any trace of humanity he had inside of him in order to serve this God who demanded blood. David was also not a fan of treason against God. 2 men killed the son of Saul and brought his head to David. David was appalled because this was a man of God, and so in retaliation, he had his men cut off their hands and feet and hung them over a pool for everyone to see. David also went to overtake the city of Jerusalem. When he was there, he told his men that whoever killed all the lame and blind would be captain of his army. He did not want lame or blind in his holy city. David fought in many other battles, and according to the Bible, killed a lot of people, including slaying the Philistines multiple times. David is also known for his infamous affair with Bathsheba and killing her husband so he could continue to sleep with her and not be punished for it. This is the one time in his life that David is told by God that killing was not all right. Do you know why? Because this was a man of the same God. David was someone who followed his God very strictly, and this was something you do not do. Kill your own in order to get what you want. This is where we see how merciless God really is, because instead of punishing the man who did the deed, he punishes a helpless baby. He makes sure the child that they had together dies. How sick is that? God did not give David a sickness or cut him off from his people. God wanted to punish David in a way that would last, but not in a way that would do anything to harm or hurt David physically. While I know that emotionally losing a child is a hard thing to go through, God deciding that this kid was not going to have a life because his parents made a mistake is morally wrong. This should never happen. David then goes and kills the Ammonites, using axes, saws, and even putting people through a brick kiln. David punishes the women in his household who are used by his son. They are banished to do housework for the rest of their lives. David stops a famine by killing all of the remaining sons of Saul. They are all rounded up and hanged. David's life ends the same way his reign of terror began. He tells a son to avenge him and the people who wronged him in life. David was, in fact, a man after God's own heart. He had the heart of a ruthless, bloody war criminal. If David lived today, he would be put on trial for war crimes. He had no mercy when it came to anyone who did not serve the Lord of Israel. Looking from the outside, David was not a good man. David ignored his own conscience to do what he thought the God he served would do. He would kill, torture, destroy, and get rid of anyone who did not serve his God. He was raised to be a tribal king and to keep peace only in his own city. David did not value human life. He valued what God wanted above anything else. The cult-like mentality David had turned him into a monster who would do anything to conquer anyone around him that was not a part of his own tribe. David is a prime example of why tribalism is a dangerous concept in today's society. When you split into separate groups and have an us versus them mentality, you are led down roads that can endanger other people and their well-being. While I do not believe that a lot of the stories in the Bible are true, I do believe that the Bible sets a bad example for people who claim that the God of the Bible is a loving and caring God who values human life. Just by looking at the story of the man God favored, we can see this is not the case. The God of the Bible is a war god, and a God who loves blood. He calls the burnt offerings sent to him a sweet fragrance. He longs to see the sacrifices laying on the altars and the blood pouring out. He demands human mutilation and human sacrifice to save people and make them more appealing to himself. He wants the blood of anyone who would deny his existence to be spilled. Only the most righteous men who do his bidding and wage war against them will be blessed. So next time people tell you about the wonderful man named David and how they long to be like him, remind them that David was a warrior who killed the innocent, tortured people, and plundered whatever he could in the name of the Lord. If he was doing the same thing in the name of Allah, would you still admire him? Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to smash that like button and comment below. Remember, only you can break out of the bubble and start thinking for yourself.